Thank you all. Congratulations on being here. And thank you, and I hope you've had a good weekend, and thanks for letting me speak to you. I'm usually kind of nervous when I give speeches, but I'm not tonight because someone must have given this speech when I was in your seats 36 years ago, and I have absolutely no memory of what he or she said. So I feel like the pressure is really low. Like if I'm totally vapid, you're not going to remember that in the span of a couple of months or years, and if I'm profound, that'll also be lost. So I feel like there's absolutely no pressure. But I do hope you'll remember for just a couple days or weeks some of the stuff I say, because I know you are at what you feel is a really important crossroads. And the first thing I want to say to you, and I don't even know if this is something Chuck and Megan and company want me to say, but you all may feel in the coming weeks like you have the biggest decision of your life ahead of you. Like your future is going to rise or fall. You're going to soar or stumble based on what happens. So something going on over there? No. And that is not the case at all. If you are all in this room right now, if you made it this far in the selection process, you are already in great shape. You're in clover. You have lavish talents. You have promise galore. There's no reason for any of you not to expect and not to demand a brilliant future. You're here because you have the ability and dexterity to create that future. And you're here because you've shown that you can steer your life with clearness and purpose. That's already established. So the decisions that all of you make, including about college, aren't fundamentally about whether you'll prosper. They're about who you are. They're about your priorities, your intentions, your values, in a word. Values are exactly what brought me to UNC as a Morehead scholar. Then we were just called Moreheads. Now it's Morehead-Cain. So if I continue to say Morehead, please forgive me. I'm speaking in the old language. But values are what brought me here as a Morehead in the fall of 1982. My situation as I deliberated over whether to come here was probably similar to the situations that many of you are in now. I attended a private school in the Northeast, as Chuck mentioned. Loomis Chaffee was the name of the school in my case. I had always been focused on, actually obsessed with is probably the better phrase, the Ivy League and the Ivy Like. I had set my sights on Yale, I had applied early action, and I had been accepted. And then the Morehead came along. I was invited down here for the conversations and tours and such that you've been doing this weekend. I was absolutely sure, 100%, that I blew my interview, because what happened to me then, and I do remember this much about the weekend, is what still happens to me today if, for example, I'm making a high-profile television appearance. I went into a sort of dissociative amnesia-like fugue state and had no real-time sense or immediate recall of any of my answers or words. For all I knew, I recited the lyrics to a Beatles song during my interview. Although I guess I wouldn't have gotten it if I had. Somehow I was offered the scholarship, and then I did have to choose. And that choice boiled down to what I thought education was ultimately about and what kind of person I ultimately wanted to be. Thinking harder and deeper about Yale than I had until that moment, I realized that it was the quintessence of the familiar. Yale was in the same state I was living in, Connecticut, and it was less than an hour's drive from my family's house. I knew the route by heart. I was a competitive swimmer at the time, and I had swum more than a half dozen meets in Yale's pool. So I hadn't just seen the Yale campus many times. I was familiar with what the water felt like at Yale. I would arrive there, and I would already be acquainted with more than a dozen of my fellow students because classmates from my private school had gone or were going to Yale. And most other Yaleys would be from educational and socioeconomic backgrounds strikingly similar to my own. Yale was a sort of perfect extrapolation of my life to that moment in time. And Yale belonged to the script. You know what I mean, I think, when I talk about the script. It's that precise plan that so many of your parents and peers and college counselors have laid out for you. It's that long, ornate list of achievements that you're supposed to ace. It's all those mile markers that you're supposed to pass. Yale was what was expected of me. It represented continuity, conformity, and obedience. And I realized then that I didn't want to continue, conform, and obey. not at that juncture and not beyond it. When I imagined my adult life and what I hoped would be my many adult adventures, I wanted to improvise, I wanted to surprise others, and in the process, I wanted to surprise myself. I wanted to color outside the lines, and I wanted to take risks. Besides, isn't education about challenging your existing presumptions, expanding your established frame of reference, and plucking the fruits of an unknown land? I knew nothing about North Carolina or about large state universities. I couldn't name a single North Carolinian. Before Morehead Finals Weekend, I'd never been south of the Mason-Dixon line, unless you counted Disney World, and I'm pretty sure Disney World has an exemption. So for me, the right course, the course that would discomfit me in the right ways and would broaden me, was clear. I ended up accepting the Morehead and coming to UNC, and I have never, not once, not for a day, not for an hour, regretted that decision. That could just be human nature. To focus on the road not taken is to consign yourself to regret and to entertain the possibility that you've wasted this one precious life. But I think my feeling of certainty about the decision I made is grounded in the experience that I had here. I may not remember Morehead Finals Weekend, but I do remember freshman year and sophomore year and junior year. I'd like to add senior year to that list, but I'd finished most of my requirements by then, and I'd begun to celebrate graduation a little bit early. So senior year is, I will admit, quite a bit hazier than the others. As an English major, I got a fantastic education in a top-notch department with terrific professors who took such a strong interest in me that one of them admitted me into several of his graduate seminars. I spent several dozen hours a week writing and editing stories for the Daily Tar Heel, and in the process I found my path to the profession that I've pursued ever since. I'm not sure I would have had this job or these adventures had it not been for the Daily Tar Heel and UNC. I might have entered an entirely different field, and that thought gives me pause because this field has brought such contentment and so much excitement my way. At UNC, I also got an exposure to the world and an immersion in it that my siblings at their colleges didn't get in the same manner. My older brother went to Amherst, my younger brother to Dartmouth, and my sister, the youngest, to Princeton. My mother had a killer collection of stickers on the back windshield of her fuel-efficient Subaru station wagon. My siblings at their schools were instantly surrounded by people just like them. Their closest friends were carbon copies of them. Part of that was the era. Schools weren't paying nearly as much heed then to diversity as they are now, but part of that speaks to realities that still exist today. Amherst, Dartmouth, and Princeton were and are extrapolations for certain secondary school students, including many of you here this weekend. Amherst, Dartmouth, and Princeton fit neatly into the script. At UNC, I had friends from rural areas. I had friends from families with very little money. I had friends who worked jobs here in Chapel Hill to help pay tuition, room, and board. I had conservative friends, plenty of them, and I could simultaneously joust with them and be freed from any stereotypes or caricatures I had of conservatives in general and of Southern conservatives in particular. UNC, to be totally honest, wasn't a theater of extraordinary geographic diversity, because 4 in 5 students here are North Carolinians. But it was and is a theater of extraordinary diversity of every other kind. Part of that is because North Carolina itself is one of the country's most fascinatingly diverse states, with a contentious political dynamic that's an education in and of itself. And part of that is because UNC is fiercely committed to diversity, especially socioeconomic diversity, to a degree that very, very few schools of this caliber are. There is something to be said, something big and important, about public education and public universities, which have a mandated fundamental mission to expand opportunity. They also have a truly organic concern for the common good. It's in the DNA of these institutions, and it's encoded in the sensibilities of their administrators and their faculty members. I see that now from the vantage point of my seat on a special committee of outside advisors who have been meeting here in Chapel Hill under the guidance of the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences to help reimagine and reconfigure the undergraduate experience that all of you will have if you come here. There are about a dozen of us on this committee. We come from all over the country and from all walks of life. There's a noted venture capitalist in our group. There's the head of Habitat for Humanity, and somehow I snuck in the door, and I'm still trying to figure out how that happened. For several days every 6 months here in Chapel Hill, we converse with top faculty members, with the heads of various departments, and with other university leaders. And I am wowed, genuinely wowed by the passion they feel for this institution, for the energy that they bring to it, and for the standards that they're establishing for it. They're exactly as focused on getting students out into the world, on the global dimension of education, as they should be in this day and age, and you heard Carol mention that. They're fixated rightly on social mobility, and they're ever more attentive to what I think is one of the most important challenges of our time, which is making sure that we Americans don't retreat into narrow ideological, political, and cultural enclaves, cloisters of the mind, and that we don't lose the ability to talk to one another, to understand one another, to compromise with one another, to find common ground, and to engage in constructive political debate. In America right now, the combined forces of the internet in general, social media in particular, fake news, the trend toward more subjective and agenda-driven journalism, excessive money in politics, and aggravated partisanship, all of those things are driving us dangerously apart, yanking us from one extreme to another and preventing us from getting the nation's most important business done. I think the college experience, if devised correctly, is one of our most potent and promising antidotes to that. And at the most recent meeting of the advisory committee I mentioned, that subject got more discussion and attention by far than any other. And that in turn told me something that I already knew from my own experience here 3.5 decades ago, and from my observation of my alma mater over the years. UNC is not just one of this country's foremost universities, with a size and a scope that allow any student here to pursue pretty much any dream that he or she can imagine. It's also a university that is dedicated deep in its bones to playing a consequential and constructive role in this madly ambitious, gloriously accomplished, and profoundly flawed experiment called America. That dedication colors the education that students get here. It colored the education that I got. It colored the career that I've had. If I summoned just a bit more curiosity than some of my peers in the news business, I think it owed something to the diversity and the sensibility, and for me, the newness of this environment. If I were a bit more open-minded and open-eyed in my observations than my peers, again, I think this place played a big part in that. If I were a bit more comfortable moving through eclectic groups of people, and if I were a bit more calm and confident when the road took unexpected curves, it was partly because coming here represented one of those curves. I want to brag on UNC in yet one other way. For the last 3 years, I've had the privilege of serving as one of the 8 judges who decides each year's new crop of Mitchell Scholars. Some of you probably don't know about the Mitchells. They're very much like, and they're competitive with the Rhodes Scholarships, but they're less than 2 decades old and so not nearly as famous. Some Rhodes aspirants, though, have in fact diverted to the Mitchells instead. So we're talking about the highest caliber of college students in this country who get the Mitchells. They get an all-expense-paid master's degree program at one of Ireland's top schools. The Mitchell sees itself as sort of Ireland's answer to England and the Rhodes. And Mitchells are chosen not just for academic achievement, though that's obviously paramount, but also, crucially, for service work, for contributions that they've made to their communities. The first of the 3 years that I served as a judge, there was no school that produced 2 Mitchell winners. Every Mitchell winner had gone somewhere different as an undergraduate. The second year, one school did produce 2 Mitchells, and that school was Michigan State University. This last year, we just made these decisions in November, there was a different school that produced 2 Mitchells when no other school did, and it was the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. To come here for the Morehead is the best of several worlds, or at least it was for me. It provided something of the intimacy and support structure of a smaller college within the scale and infinite options of a large university. It gave me an instant circle of acquaintances whose accomplishments impress me to this day. I mentioned that I sit on that UNC advisory committee with the head of Habitat for Humanity, which is obviously one of the most admired nonprofits in the world. His name is Jonathan Reckford. He was a Morehead in the class just 2 years ahead of mine, and I knew him then, and I'm proud to still know him now. At the beginning of my remarks, I also mentioned decisions. You have an important, scratch that, you have an exciting decision ahead of you when you pick your college. But you'll have much more consequential decisions beyond that one. Whom you marry and pledge your utmost loyalty, should you choose to do that, that will have an emotional and spiritual impact more profound than the name of the school on your college diploma. Where you eventually plant your roots and the role you elect to play in that community, that's a biggie. The same goes for the kind of son, daughter, brother, or sister that you resolve to be, or the parenting that you do or don't take on. But with every decision you make, you are or you should be saying something about your identity and about your ideals. Is the road you take true to what you value? And does the road you take head in the direction of your best self? Only you can answer that, and that answer will differ for each of you because you're coming from different places with different compasses and with different goals. But if I can take the liberty of imposing just a few of my prejudices on you, I'd advise this. Figure out which of the roads ahead of you is the bolder one and which is the more timid one, and please go for the bold. Which direction frightens you a bit? Head that way. I may be dating myself here, but how many of you have seen the movie Jerry Maguire? Come on, some of you must have. Okay, well, the rest of you should. That's your assignment after tonight. But for those of you who have seen it, do you remember that scene in the elevator about a third of the way through the movie when a couple is speaking in sign language and Tom Cruise asks Renee Zellweger what one of them said to the other? And she happens to know the answer. And the answer is that one of them says to the other, "You complete me." Choose the path that completes you. Think WWJD. What would Jerry do? He'd stop dwelling on his vanity while he tends to his soul, or at least that's his trajectory in the movie. It should be all of our trajectories in life, and I hope it becomes yours or already is yours. I'm going to leave you there, but I want to, because I'm going to take some questions at Chuck's request, wherever Chuck went. But I want to congratulate all of you on being here. I want to wish you the best of luck with whatever you decide to do down the road and in all of your future endeavors. And I want you, as you forget everything I said tonight, to especially forget the part about senior year, okay? Thank you.